Super. Yeah. Thank you, Kimberly, very much. And it's a fantastic question because it's a decision that every organization has to make as they consider an acquisition. Sometimes that question may be considered a little too late. So kudos to you for thinking about it in advance of the acquisition happening. And based on my experience, it's never sort of, there's never a clear black and white answer to that question. The best place to start, I think, however, is to do a sort of a side-by-side process analysis. Typically, the incoming organization, right, has a different way of doing things, a different way of operating than perhaps you've been doing, and as a result, their Salesforce org and all of the surrounding applications are also being used in a different way. And I'm sort of a big believer in in the old adage of people, process, and systems, and how that it's absolutely critical that you understand the way that the organizations have been operating from a process standpoint before you make that determination. Generally speaking, from what I've seen, there's good, and there are things that you will want to preserve, typically coming from both organizations. You may have implemented some best practices in certain areas, and the incoming organization may have implemented some best practices. And so oftentimes it'll end up being a bit of a hybrid solution. Rarely have I seen organizations just say, we're just going to start from scratch. I've gotten close a few times, but generally speaking, that the cost and effort of doing that usually, unless the org is really, really broken, the cost of doing that sort of outweighs the benefit of starting from scratch. But that is certainly a viable option. If your intention is to continue acquisitions, obviously starting from scratch each time doesn't make a lot of sense. So picking the org that has sort of the most good to retain is the best approach. And let me just share with you a couple of slides that might be helpful as well. I would suggest going through, and by the way, I think we can provide you after the call with some templates that can help you through this process a little bit. But I would start with sort of a high level prioritization of your most important processes. Where are the areas, as a result of bringing in this new organization, this new acquisition, where are the areas that we really want to focus and we want to make sure are optimized? And start there, right? Build a strong foundation, a strong base around the processes that are most important to you as a company, or the processes perhaps that are that are in most need of improvement. And kind of go through a list like this. I know it seems maybe a little bit daunting, but go through and just kind of pick out the top 5 or 10 process areas, maybe 15, that you want to focus on. And then take the time to sit down and have a working session to talk through the two processes. How are things done today in the current org? How are things done in the incoming org and in the organization itself, not just the Salesforce org, but in general? How are people working together? How are you operating? What are the key handoffs? And how are those handoffs, how effective are those handoffs today? There's some sort of helpful criteria that you can also use to evaluate those processes. These are 4 that we commonly use when deciding like which org do I keep. But these very same criteria can be used when evaluating multiple tools that are doing the same thing, or multiple processes. So it doesn't have to be just at an org level. But I always start with the question of how effective is the current process? Like, are we driving the right behaviors? Are we getting the results that we're expecting based on our key business metrics? Is the current process working as we intend it to work? then say, okay, based on that, how mature are the various processes? We might have a process that's very effective, but that's not scalable, or that involves a whole lot of manual steps and manual processes. And so that's another criteria to just say how sophisticated or how automated are the two processes? Will one approach allow us to scale more easily in the future, adapt to changes in our business and in the market and so forth, and do sort of an assessment along those lines. And then oftentimes the question of data comes into play. And that could be both a question of volume of data, so which org has the most information in it, but perhaps more importantly is how complete and accurate and meaningful or valuable is the data that is in each of the orgs and in the processes that are producing that data. And do we have what we need from a future business standpoint to make good management decisions? And then last, it might be least, I'm not sure, but how well is the process being used today? Do users like it? Do we have good adoption? The best laid process is no good if your users aren't actually utilizing it. So a quick discussion around adoption and challenges that you may have there is also a great place to start. So again, just to kind of recap, I would definitely take the time to decide up front what are the critical areas that we're going to focus on, prioritize those, and then take the opportunity, sit down together with folks who understand your processes and the incoming processes, and do a side-by-side evaluation of each of those processes. And then ultimately you have to make a call. Do we sort of just stick with what we're doing? Do we adopt perhaps some of the processes from the new acquisition and create more of a hybrid, or do we potentially utilize their org and then go from there? As I mentioned, I think probably 9 times out of 10 you're going to find that there's good that can be harvested from both and combined for the best overall solution.